Reality Forum, a podcast focused on a series of topics related to recent global, social, and economic developments in the world and the US. I'm your host, Josh Lipman, joined by my co host, Max Piette.
Hello, Josh. It's a real honor to be here today. Thank you very much for having me.
I want to thank you all for joining us in our first episode. The structure for this podcast is going to be our analysis of a series of studies and articles related to the topics that we're going to focus on. Today's topic is going to be the topic on everyone's mind, the recent pandemic. So let's jump into this shit.
All right. Well,
All this shit is changing rapidly on a weekly basis, but still provide some good insight on what's going on now and what's likely trends that are going to persist. So
it's
let's
true.
read on.
So, the ri- the most notably, 3 and 5 of them think that there's too much going on, in risk of the coronavirus. The resistors strongly support the current lockdown measures. So that's a pretty drastic proportion. They believe that the coronavirus was probably created in a lab. It's more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. That makes sense to me that the population that would doubt anything that would go along on, though, for quite a while, I feel.
That makes sense. We've definitely seen that in the US too. I just spoke to someone today here in Santa Barbara that the virus was created in a lab in China and brought deliberately here to infect everyone for nefarious reasons. Let's take a closer look at what the article breaks down. Looks like there's three groups. So
Yes.
resistors.
So they're kind of like saying that the way that which kind of makes sense, I believe, but I feel like most people would want to feel like more going on there.
Yeah, there's definitely a political bent as far as the from what I've seen, the willingness and in the media, the willingness of people to comply with the restrictions and their beliefs of the coronavirus and what it is and its severity. There's definitely a correlation to political parties. I'm sure in the UK, but definitely in the US, but not totally, not completely. So in the US, from what we've seen, is that Democrats, more left leaning side, everyone there is more likely to comply with the restrictions and believe that this is a severe threat. This is something that requires lockdown and requires our full compliance. More on the right, we're seeing less compliance, more of a focus on individual responsibility and rights. And like, listen, it's above all, especially in the US, I don't know what the values are in the UK. That's number one, individual rights. It's what I stand for. Uh, but that's as far as the correlations go to political parties. There's not a complete correlation. So there's definitely people on the right that are wearing masks, complying, believe that this is a severe threat that we need to take precautions against, and even to the point where they're not fully subscribing to the conservative ideologies of individual rights. So this is a collective effort that we have, especially in California with the extension of the lockdown, where we both currently are. A lot of people, even on the left, are fed up and want this to be done. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's very true, but I also think that of the of what you would expect is like it would be like a really radical right statist who is like super backing governmental control in response, and like it's like what, like that doesn't make any sense. But it kind of makes sense when you think about it, because it's like a statist who's a right-leaning person is going to be like, oh, just like maybe blindly supporting what the state is in favor is saying. But then you also see like Democrats who are like very left-leaning, who are like saying, no, like don't get involved. Like this is my safe space. Like I get to do what my life is my safe
Yeah,
space. You
the
know what I
whole
mean?
sentiment, the safe space culture. And I don't know, maybe our viewers in the UK can elucidate us on what the general sentiment among the parties there is like. Is the Conservative Party there the same as the Conservative here? I know there's similarities, and the UK tends to be more left leaning than the US as a whole. Uh, but what I want to say is what I really like about this article is how it splits everyone up. And keep in mind, like I said, this is 3 weeks ago, so I think the breakdown of these groups has skewed, especially in the US since then. But as far as the groups, these three groups definitely represent our population. The accepting, and I think it breaks down demographics further up in the article and socioeconomic class. But definitely the accepting is going to be your wealthier,
Talking about gender
uh,
here.
more well-to-do class that are just up in arms and vigilant about stopping the spread and putting on their masks and telling everyone to stay inside. And it's our duty to do that. You know, especially we've seen this in the U.S. and in California. A lot of people who make six-figure a year salaries, whether they're working home or not, up in arms and telling everyone, "Hey, you know, you're a pool man. That's too bad. You got to stay home. You got to stop the spread because this doesn't just affect you; it affects everyone else." So we definitely see a lot of that in California. I think that's what the accepting is, and not only the upper class, six-figure a year income earners,
Just
but
adaptable people, people who are have the understanding. It's like it's not even whether or not you believe of like that it's gonna kill you or that you have a direct contribution. It's just like a little bit of like awareness of the potential of things or like or the implication. Just like I don't know how to exactly articulate it, but it's just like what those people are rarer, so they're going to be clustered into like a smaller group. But like,
yeah. Now the accepting in the UK is from what we've seen, a larger portion of the population. So it doesn't exclusively consist of high income earners. It's more people who agree with the lockdown, and it's split between the two. More middle class, more upper middle class, but generally people who agree with the lockdown and are willing to comply, even at their own expense.
well, this may
And
also have like a socioeconomic like implications.
yeah,
Like it's a very you have to think about England's a very small country with a high population, but also like it's extremely high level of organization. So I think it has a level of adaptability. It's like what you see maybe saw in World War II, where it's like yeah, this is a really difficult situation that most people wouldn't be able to maybe do as well in, but they're very able, like capable first world country.
yeah, I think this is a smaller portion of the population in the US, especially now.
I
I
think so
mean,
too.
3 weeks after this article was published, more and more people are falling into the resisting group, falling, from this. There's more people suffering than accepting and resisting in the U.S. So yeah, it's interesting to see that almost half the population falls within this group, and it even says right there, significantly less likely to say they are certain or likely to lose their jobs or even experience financial difficulties. These are people not even experiencing financial difficulties.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say was I don't know if this is going to come up in a future article, but it might. Uh, Basically the England being a socialist country, like the the difference in the stimulus checks and the way that they may have really like stimulated the economy like a really in a much more maybe like I don't know how exactly whether it's better or worse that maybe we'll find out in the future, but like that might be macro and microeconomics and creating a bubble and all of that, but like maybe that's what's going on here. That's all I'm
Yeah.
saying.
What's what I'll say about the accepting group in the US is it's people who are accepting, who are putting up with this and staying at home and telling everyone else to stay at home. Most of them, if I had to guess, 60 to 80% of them are well to do and can afford to do it. And what's become a growing and prevalent problem, and we see this more in the left than any other political class in the US, some of them on the right, is they have a complete just bubble mentality. They're all in a bubble, and they lack self awareness and awareness of everyone else who is resisting and doesn't want to stay at home and can't afford to stay at home. Seeing a big class of people, and they're the most outspoken, but they represent a small portion of the population. Telling, we see this in the LA, this biggest disparity between the biggest wealth gap is in the California and in LA, and we see this particularly pronounced. People were making six figures a year and telling poolmen and housekeepers that hey, it's you got to comply with the restrictions. You got to follow the law. I mean, there is a virus, so wear your mask, stay at home. And my question is, what's going to come of this, especially in LA County? Now, they recently started rolling out stage two, meaning they're opening more restaurants, allowing dine in. They did that here in Santa Barbara. They're doing it in Ventura County. And a lot of other states are doing that as well. But in LA County, what's to come of the pool man? What's to come of the gardener or the the restaurant worker or any other worker, low income to middle income worker who is fired or laid off? That class of people is not gonna put up with it for much longer, is my opinion. Uh, we're going to see a lot of revolting and resisting, and rightfully so. We're already seeing it in small steps. I'm going to actively participate that personally. The way I've been doing it now is I'm not wearing a mask. I'm sick. We've already flattened the curve.
Yeah.
We've flattened it sufficiently. We can't stay at home and be scared forever, especially at the expense of everyone else. Everyone who's losing money, losing income, losing their jobs. That has its own health implications. Look at the suicide rates in the past 2 months. Look at the amount of people that are experiencing mental and even physical health effects from the effects of losing their jobs and losing their income and losing their money. I'm sure many of our viewers can relate to that. And if you are one of those people, I say to you, start resisting. Stop wearing your mask. And if you own a business, open it up. I think we're going to see a lot of that too. A lot of storefront, restaurant, and retail business owners are going to start opening up their businesses in spite of the government. So, and I welcome that. And I think we should have it. Let's move on real quick before we move on to our next article. Looks like you're
Okay.
going to look something up.
I was just gonna go to bring up the next article, unless you wanted to do something, say some more on this.
I'm interested to see how this article breaks down the next two classes. And the class that I was just referring to was a suffering class.
Okay.
In the US, it looks like it's most divided, and where we live in California, just talking about California, most divided between the suffering and the accepting.
Well, it has
And
that seems kind of like macro of life, doesn't it? Kind of like it's like I feel like it's just brought out, like it's a lot of brought out, a lot of like what was swept under the rug, just kind of like in society. It's like there's a group of people who are always in lacking of resources, and there's another smaller group of people who have domination over the rest. And and it's not necessary. It's very fluid. It can be fluid in between those two positions, but it's like just like it's a louder sound of like what you that you would hear normally.
Yeah. Let's see. The suffering. 93% report feeling more anxious and depressed since lockdown measures introduced. That's, listen, the coronavirus has its own health effects. That's a health implication. That, anyone that has experienced severe anxiety, depression, that fucks you up. A lot of people are going to get fucked up by this. They already are.
Oh yeah, and I feel like when when economy like even remotely returns to something that's feasibly normal, all of these people, 93% of the 44% of the population have a massive chip on their shoulder. And that could be a good thing, or it could be a bad thing, or it could be both at different time, or both at the same
Yeah.
time.
That's the next thing we'll talk about is long-term implications of this.
Yeah, which
But
is
64% have slept less or worse than usual. No surprise there. When you lose your job, you start thinking about where's the money going to come in. That's another thing. The stimulus combined with unemployment benefits, especially in California, are not enough to sustain anyone.
or when you work in the health industry and you're literally like body bagging people all day. Like that's got to be
Yeah,
pretty also like I wouldn't get to sleep that night if I was doing that.
yeah. Spending much more time thinking about the coronavirus and other groups. I think everyone is. 93% say they're following lockdown rules completely.
I
They're
feel like
following the rules.
I feel like the only people who aren't thinking about the coronavirus all the time are like the kind of people who would like not think about anything other than themselves if anything happened. Like there could a nuke could go off and like they would just be thinking about themselves kind of
Yeah.
thing. You know what I mean?
And that's the highest of all groups, by the way,
That's
that it
crazy.
says that are following the rules. And you know why I think that is? They want more than the other groups, and that's more than the accepting, by the way. They, more than all the other groups, want this shit to end.
Or they just like enjoy kind of like the idea that no matter what, like they're gonna be a law-abiding citizen. Like that they're like very like sentimental in that way, I guess.
Maybe. Most likely to be closely following official guidance. They want the shit to end. 93% and 85 say support lockdown measures and additional police powers, respectively. I'm surprised. So, listen, if you're part of the suffering group, compliance is not going to save you. If you own a business that got shut down, complying with the government is not going to save you, keeping your business closed. The government can't keep enforcing these restrictions if no one complies with them. That's what no one realizes about this. If you don't actually support what's going on, your lack of compliance makes a difference, even in little ways, even in small ways. You're walking into a store and not wearing a mask, or you're refusing to comply with small restrictions, incentivizes and compels others to do the same and restrict and
Not only
not
that,
comply in the same way.
not only that, but like the whole principle of the economy is based on free trade and open probably one of the only like feasible principles that it isn't like hands-on medical work that anybody can do that is actually most likely going to have a positive impact on humanity or like the whole situation as a whole because the economy being damaged is beneficial for nobody and the police trying to limit the trade and commerce is literally like just going to put them out of business. And if they go out of business, then like if people aren't engaging in commerce, then like there's no tax. Where's the police going to get their tax money from? It? Like just think about it. They don't think 2, 3 steps ahead of them. Eh, whatever. I rest
Let's
my case.
see. Interesting. And last one is resisting. And
it was done here.
existing. At the time, this was only 10% of the UK. I'm sure it's increased since then,
Oh yeah, a
and
huge
it's
amount.
maybe the same portion of the US. 49% say they're complying, and even these guys are complying. 50% of them are complying. So that means that only 5% of the population are not actually complying with the lockdown rules, meaning that they're going outside. And I've been going out. Hey, listen, guys, ladies and gentlemen, this is the perfect time to travel. Okay, take road trips, explore the country if you have the means to. If you got hit hard by the lockdown, it's grind time. It's time to figure out how you're going to make that bread. But if you have the means, travel. It's a perfect time to do it. Uh, but
I just checked flights to London, $250.
that's crazy.
$250, ladies and gentlemen. That's a $2,000 ticket for $250 to London. And check Paris, it's probably less. Like, like, I'm sorry, but I I'm a dual citizen, so it's easy for me. I'm gonna do that. But like, what he's saying is like I want to back it up so much. Like, if you think that like you need to let yourself be put into like this mental cage that you think that oh like if you step outside you're gonna get sick like the only reason that you should be having the mentality of like of being in the same place is if you're grinding on a project and you're being productive and you're using this time to like generate a renaissance in your life.
Trying
It
to survive.
yeah, like other if you aren't like literally like wondering like how am I gonna get food, like you should just be like thinking about all of the time that you have in your hands and not like like there's no reason to go out picketing in front of Washington in front of the White House or because you think that like this is like some kind of New World Order fucking yes, I'm gonna bleep that out but yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will say this. Eventually, if this persists, the government restrictions keep persisting. I'd say past summer, I fully endorse and support protesting, and especially local governments. It's where it starts because that's who has all the power in this situation. So any form of activism or protesting, uh, I endorse. Interest. So only 5% of the UK is not complying with the lockdown rules. It really goes to show you, even people who don't agree with this are complying.
Yeah, but I feel like those people are like it's very hit or miss if they're actually trying to do something that is like directly like anti-government. Like I feel like half of those people are like media. Like they're independent media and they're being classified as like protesters, but really they're like people who are trying to capture a message and that involves being like compromising the law. Do you know what I mean? Like like Greenpeace isn't like anarchy. They're not like anarchists. They're like trying to make a statement.
Right. Could be
Which
that.
it could be the same. It could be. I see how that's classified the same way, but I feel like it's important to make the distinction.
Only around half support both lockdown measures and new police powers to support. I'm surprised any of them support this. It really goes to show you, even the resisting, and it's emblematic of the culture and social demeanor in the UK. Like they said at the beginning of the article, even with government restrictions, people are so patriotic and supportive of their government there. Hail the Queen, it's support the government, that even those of them that are resisting support the rules simply for the sake of supporting the rules. That's not the case in the US. We have an anti-government sentiment here, which, by the way, is the reason we've prospered as long as we have, and not in every way. We're not a completely prosperous nation. We have our faults, we have our problems, but you can't argue that we have prospered.
Well, that's the
on
spirit.
a global stage.
It's the spirit of America. It's like it's like was what the energy of America was founded on. You know what I mean? Like it's like straight
Yeah.
out of the rebellion.
Much less likely than other groups to be following official guidance. That makes sense. Such as staying 2 meters away. I hope so. That alone, lack of human contact. We're not wired for that. As humans, we have to talk to people, we have to socialize, we have to meet people, we have to touch people just to maintain our sanity. And
Yeah.
don't let a government tell you that you can't do that.
No, absolutely. I mean, it's like very like almost like feels like a symptomatic of like I see what people are on about where it's like a symptom of like an attempt to break down the psyche in order to create like a condition which is like mu easier to control, which is like very, it's just something easy to resist if you have the mental aptitude to be like to recognize it when it's happening. But like I don't necessarily think that that's what's going on like 100%. I feel like it's a thing that could be easily taken advantage of to do such a thing. But I think it's so I think for that reason it's really important to counter that with like constant interaction in some fashion, whether that is through Zoom or like fucking not like in my opinion I think you should just go out there and meet and be with people and spend time with people that you know. I think that's important. Um, because otherwise, yeah, like you said, like you'll just completely lose your sense of reality.
Yeah,
And this is the
interesting.
world's reality for him. You don't want to lose your sense of reality.
At the end of the day, it's all about how this affects the majority of our population. In the US and worldwide, the majority of our population is hit hard by this, economically and otherwise, not by the coronavirus alone. Coronavirus itself is a joke. It directly affects such a small portion of the total population. And when you look at the adverse effects of that compared to the adverse effects of the shutdown
Yeah.
and economic restrictions,
Uh,
it pales in
yeah,
comparison.
yeah. It's
But
like
there's no joy. And listen, my heart goes out to anyone who has felt those severely, that economic shock, that
yeah,
economic
absolutely.
impact.
Like I'm so thankful for my ability to be in like to cuz like if I was going through this like 6 months ago, like I would be completely screwed. And so
Yeah,
so I completely understand like where people are coming from and like, there needs to be more done to provide for those people and but like it needs to be fashioned in such a way that it's not compromising to to the integrity of the nation and to the integrity of the people that it's being provided for because like we said, like the long-term effects of this and the chip on the shoulder and that can be really can also like thought of in a way that like if you lose your sense of like work ethic of like what it takes to like what this is really about, like that could also be equally detrimental. So
yeah.
are you ready to move on to the next article?
Let's move on to the next article.
All right, awesome. Let's pull this next one up. This one is also another UK article. So we'll be getting our fair share. All right. So this one involves Trump though, so that's cool. All right. How do you want to watch this 20-second clip of Trump talking? Let's do it.
Let's watch
Jared
it.
and Ivanka serving on the new task force, and how are you going to balance what?
No, they're not. No. But yeah,
Are Jared and Ivanka serving on the new task force?
Make sure the
and how are you
sound
gonna
works.
balance what?
Yeah, it does, but that was kind of irrelevant. That was just him being asked if Ivanka was on the coronavirus task force.
Uh,
Yeah.
how coronavirus is killing democracy in Congress. Why don't you summarize this?
Okay, so Do you remember? Okay, so do you remember when they were trying to pass the first stimulus bill, but they couldn't get it approved, but because either like the Democrats would keep on like sneaking like diversions of the funds into like ulterior like acts or whatever that weren't related, or
Yeah.
and so it was like dead on the floor for quite a while.
Now, their incentive for that was adding stipulations to the stimulus package that ensured that the money went towards suffering workers and not for stock buybacks for companies and for bailouts. And that I support. I endorse that. Uh, One of the things that we need to prevent that happened during the last crash was a lot of companies got bailed out that didn't deserve it. And it was a free market supporter. I think that all the companies that were impacted by the last crash should have died. That's the natural selection of capitalism. Any form of government intervention, and even at the expense of the banking sector and the financial services sector. Uh, it's the nature of natural selection and of evolution in free markets is that we have tough times, but industries, businesses, and individuals adapt and survive. And we didn't let that happen. And we're not letting it happen now either on an economic level, but also on an individual level. We think about social distancing and keeping people at home. We're building no herd immunity, which is another thing that's going to set us up for disaster if this virus rolls around again. But as far as this stimulus package goes, yeah, I'm familiar with it. And that was the case. It's why they kept delaying it, is they wanted to add those stipulations.
Well, yeah,
Absolutely, companies shouldn't be using the money to engage in stock buybacks or bailouts. Now, I will say, I said that I don't support government intervention in free markets. This is a scenario where some level of intervention and stimulus is required if we're shutting down the economy. If that's no, we have no choice but not to. I don't think we should shut down the economy in the first place. So really, any government intervention from the get-go, we shouldn't have. But
yeah. So I mean, I don't think so. They were trying to. There's two points I have. They were trying to also like direct the majority, I guess, of the stimulation to a program that would like prioritize minorities for the stimulus, which was like vetoed, I guess. And then also like the other half of this is like you said that you don't support government intervention. Like, do you know that like the majority of each individual's stimulus check was gonna be like prioritized and diverted to like any debt that they had,
yeah,
which is like
as a result of the impact that they had from the government requiring the businesses shut down. That's the first stage that I didn't support. Now, once we had that, yes, I support the stim. We can't shut down the economy at the same time that we provide no relief. So I did support the relief package given the shutdown. And yes, I support the stipend, each individual getting their stimulus bill. I would even like to see that they got a rent freeze and rent taken care of,
that's
which
what
I
yeah,
believe there
that's what I wanted.
was a decent portion of that landlords couldn't enforce payment for that month.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I paid it anyways. I was really dumb. Uh, but I mean,
yeah,
as far as the diversion to credit, I think that was a really good example of like when the government should have stepped in and been like, no, you can't claim this money. So it's not what it's for. It's for living. It's a stipend to live off,
you
not
can't.
for.
They said that you can use it to pay off your debt.
No, like what I'm saying is banks were taking the money for credit card debt. instead of leaving it in their checking account.
I see.
Yeah.
They were using it. Or
Like
individuals were using it for
no,
credit card
no,
debt, or
no, no.
banks were.
Like, yeah, the banks were like, if you, even if you, let's say you had a withdrawn account, or even if you didn't have a withdrawn account, let's say you had a withdrawn savings account, or even if you just had, like, what I heard was like, even if you just had credit card to debt that had nothing to do with your checkings or savings account, it would just like wire it automatically to top off your debt, to withdraw, to pay your debt, like a bank.
I see. One thing I'll say about debt is that relates to the recession that we're experiencing. Well, we're not in a recession yet. We're soon to experience one. It relates to that because we would have had a recession regardless whether there was a virus, which is something that most people don't know. We were due for one. And as a result of the level of debt service, which is payments of debt relative to income in our economy on a consumer and a business level, that combined with the current pandemic is what set us up for economic catastrophe. The amount of outstanding debt that all consumers and businesses in the economy have. There's a lot of economic implications associated with that make this particular crisis very unique. And one of those is low interest rates. Interest rates have already been extremely low prior to the crisis, and interest rates are one of the tools that our Federal Reserve uses to prop our economy back up in a crisis. They lower the rates, and they can't lower interest rates right now because they're already at zero. So there's a lot of theories and economic implications associated with that we have to think about. Could the US go into negative rates as a means of stimulating the economy?
What do you
We
mean?
wouldn't be far off from the rest of the world in doing that, in as far as many other countries
What do you
go.
mean, just printing a bunch of money?
Well, we're definitely printing a bunch of money, but when it comes to rates, that means that we're lowering the federal funds rate. So the rate at which banks can borrow money from the Federal Reserve to meet their reserve requirements. And that in turn affects the rates they can charge for their own
So
loans,
it's just
for
like
consumers, for businesses. So
just like sending a bunch more money down the flagpole like a lot faster.
exactly. So if they basically, in a nutshell, the Federal Reserve controls the rates that banks charge for their loans. The lower the rates, the more people borrow, the more we stimulate economic activity. But we can't do that right now because the rates are already at zero. Now, we could make rates negative, meaning that if I borrow money, you pay me to borrow the money. Like I literally get money for borrowing money. Uh, and it doesn't make any sense as far as the laws of nature go.
It's like,
But
well, I mean, it kind of does because it's like once you realize that there's a reward for it, because a lot of people are just afraid to go into business. Like
uh-huh.
that's just flat out like the. But once they realize that there's literally a reward for engaging in business, then they're like, oh, it's not somebody just trying to eat me alive. Like it's not,
I,
you know what I mean? Like they think that that's what it is, but once they start being like, no, like we just want you to engage in the economy, then they're like, but then that scares them even more because it's like it's like the devil like trying to get me to, you know what I mean? Do you understand where I'm coming from?
Not really, man. Because
Like
here's
they get like people are so really, I feel like people are afraid of being business owners.
well, sure, but what does that have to do with me taking out a loan? Let's say I want to borrow money from you, and let's say, yeah, I want to borrow money from you. You would charge me an interest rate
Yeah,
because you
because
want
I need
to
to
make
have a
money.
yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So what a negative interest rate is I say, hey, let me borrow some money from you, and you pay me an extra amount for the pleasure of having lent me money.
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's kind of like,
Would you be willing to do that, Max?
of course.
You're gonna give me money, and then you're gonna give me some extra money on top of that
You mean as the
for
bank
no
or
reason
as the
as a lender. I mean, let's say, because this is what a negative interest rate is in real life. I borrow money from you. I say, hey, Max, I need money. I need $10,000 to start my business. Oh, by the way, instead of me paying you all the money back plus interest, uh, you pay me for having borrowed the money from me. So you give me $10,000 and I'll pay you back. I'll pay you back 9,000. How does that sound? Does that sound good, Max?
Well, okay, that just sounds like um like a perpetual like it's like I mean, it doesn't make sense as the bank, but it
Exactly. It
makes
doesn't make sense as a bank. Well, they get some incentive from the fact that they pay a negative interest rate when they borrow money from the Federal Reserve to meet their reserve requirement. So in a sense, they're passing on savings. And by the banks are not going to charge consumers negative interest rates. They'll just lower their rates to near zero, which they've already done and are currently doing, because their rates are near zero anyway. But the implications that it has is the way we value assets, because the discount rate that we use for to value companies, to value cash flow generating assets, is the federal funds rate, is the treasury rate. The other thing is, could rates on bonds turn negative? Like we've seen that in other countries as well. But that's a whole separate topic. We could do a whole nother podcast on that. As far as this goes, is now that we're in a downturn, um, what we commonly see when there's a large influx of money in the economy is inflation as a result of spending. But all this spending, like I said earlier, since we have such a high level of debt that we had prior to this recession and this pandemic starting, that was going to initiate a recession anyway. All the money that we pump into the economy towards consumers, towards businesses, is going to go to paying down that debt. So we're not going to see any inflation. There were theories and hypotheses that we were going to see inflation as a result of this. I don't think we will. I'm going to bet that we'll see a lot of deflation because of less spending on the majority of goods in our economy that are not consumer goods or required essential goods. I think we'll see a lot of deflation in this
yeah, but
months.
there's also a lot of people who are going to be like splurging like all quarantine because they're so depressed. Like
No,
that but don't have a massive impact on the economy. This article was published quite a while ago, on the 14th of April.
oh shit, this is a month old.
Yeah, they're talking about how basically obviously the Democrats and Republicans have different interests for where the stimulation should go. They also have concerns that it'll really only last a week because of how many PPEs they need or whatever for all the businesses around the world to continue to function. Because everybody who needs to come into an office or whatever, or anybody in the world who wants to work together needs to have a mask. So there's that, but I think we solved that. I feel like this is a pretty outdated article.
Yeah,
It was the most expensive bill in U.S. history. The largest amount. This is like more money than we spent in like World War II.
it is. And another thing, the way it affects
I mean, definitely is not going to affect California. Like
could
people are,
affect California because most of the people living, a good portion people who live in California are well to do,
yeah.
but especially in LA. Um,
Yeah, I think LA has like a really big impact on the rest of the country though.
Yeah. Also, another reason I think that California is extending the restrictions. The longer they stay in a state of emergency, the more money from the federal government they get. And they know that given the pandemic and given the downturn, they are going to get a lot less capital gains tax and
Yeah.
tax otherwise revenue. They need to offset that somehow.
Well, they also know that like Californians operate the best from home. They just get stoned and they make beats and they deliver drive for Uber maybe. Like Californians are very adaptable even in the middle class and the lower class.
Yeah. Anyway,
All
do you
right.
have any ending thoughts on this article?
I mean, the CARES Act was it's like kind of old news now. It's like yeah, like it was important. It was very monumental, but it's like one event in a war zone of like very many
So
important
yeah,
events.
definitely some interesting insights here as far as the implications that the relief has had on the economy. I think that's going to be it for this podcast. Let's wrap it up and got some great insights today on the recent pandemic. We'll continue this for the next podcast. There's a lot more to talk about, and the podcast or the pandemic, of course, will continue to be around and persist by then. So, this has been our first episode of the World Reality Forum, where we give our unfiltered thoughts, opinions, and analyses on world events, global events, and all social, political, and economic developments. If you liked this episode, please give us a like and subscribe and give us any feedback or commentary on anything else you'd like to see, anything you'd like us to discuss or talk about, or anything that you.
All my information will be in the bio. Just click on those links and make sure to give a subscription on all of that stuff. So yeah, have a good one, you guys. Enjoy the rest of your quarantine if you're still in quarantine. Enjoy your freedom when that you have, no matter what. Enjoy your freedom.
Yes, enjoy your freedom.